The port strike is a really, really, really big deal. Honestly, with everything else going on between the debate and Israel and everything, maybe the biggest deal for you and me right now is the fact that all the ports on the eastern seaboard are currently shut down. It's a big deal. What is going on? Everyone's oversimplifying this. It's not simple. It's very complicated. And so what do we do? Well, let's talk to Ross Kennedy about it, founder of Fortis Analysis. He's one of these supply chain national security expert guys. Whenever I want to steal ideas from someone to make myself sound smart, I steal them from Ross Kennedy. Ross, what's going on with the ports? Why are they shut down?
Well, the upshot is that the port owners and the ship owners, the ocean carriers, have had about 3 years of warning to get negotiating with the International Longshoremen's Association. Represents about 80,000 members, 45,000 of whom are active longshoremen in about 35 different ports on the East Coast and the Gulf Coast. The labor agreement has been coming up. It's known to have been expiring on September 30th, 2024 for years, and they never got their heads around how bad it's going to be. At this point, the longshoremen have two key demands that have not been met. And so they decided to, as of 12:01 a.m. Yesterday on the 1st, they struck. And as of right now, all of those ports are shut down and not moving cargo in and out.
Ross, why 3 years? Let's begin there. You mentioned they had 3 years. They knew this was coming. This is not some big shock. 3 years and you're going to have a big problem. And here we are, October before an election, and everyone is on strike. Does this have something to do with the election? Is just people being lazy and negligent? That happens. How can you see this freight train coming for 3 years and not do anything about it?
Well, the reason that I said 3 years is October of 2021 was really when the West Coast supply chain crisis, the logistics connection out there, had really come to a head. That was the peak of when the most vessels were at anchor off the coast of Los Angeles, Long Beach, Seattle, Oakland. And everybody even then was talking about, my gosh, this is really bad now. Number one, what happens if the congestion doesn't clear at any of the ports? Number two, what happens when the ILWU, the West Coast counterpart to the ILA, if their labor contract negotiations in 22 and 23 don't go well? And then what happens in 24 if the East Coast negotiations don't go well with those longshoremen? So everybody was looking at in October of 21 at really what is the lay of the land over the next 36 to 48 months of not only COVID and supply chain congestion, but as well as longshoreman labor. And even at that time, I recall having conversations with a couple of different key executives and different ports authorities, on the Gulf Coast and in the East Coast, and me telling them, guys, you've got to get ahead of this now. Your sticking points are going to be, the fact that we're coming out of COVID. These, guys lost money if they weren't at work, as well as what happens if they go on strike and the role of automation in the ports. You need to be working ahead of this. And they just kind of hand waved it away and said, yeah. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Right now, the house is on fire. And that obviously wasn't done over the last, 12 to 18 months as the negotiation window opened.
I'm going to play, I'm sure everyone has seen this already, but Harold Daggett, he is the head of the Longshoremen Union that is currently on strike. And this video, which was from a little while ago, is going around.
Who's going to win here in the long run? You're better off sitting down and let's get a contract and let's move on with this world. In today's world, I'll cripple you. I will cripple you, and you have no idea.
Ross, I have been loudly complaining about this gentleman for a couple days, mainly because language like that turns people against the workers. And this is not a simple issue where one side is good and one side is bad, as you have laid out several times, but this kind of language publicly turns the public against you. How could you be such a moron to run your mouth like that? And he did it again after the strike. What is wrong with this guy?
Well, I think what you're seeing there is, big picture, the arrogance of a lot of unions, knowing that, historically, particularly under Democrat administrations, as we have now with the Biden-Harris administration, almost always, the federal government bends the knee, forces the private sector to the table to acquiesce to the demands of the union. And so number one, that there is very good, valid historical evidence that, they would believe the same thing would happen again here. Number two is that Daggett himself is, as you can tell by his accent, old school New York, East Coast guy who has very, very strong ties to organized crime in his past. And that's not just him personally. That's the Longshoremen Union on the East Coast and the Gulf Coast going back 100 years has had these ties to various criminal underworlds, to the point that in 2005, the former president, who Daggett has succeeded, of the ILA, had a meeting with a Genovese crime family, Genovese mafia family associate, saying, if and when you're gone, I, as a representative of the Genovese family, so to speak, would like to see Howard Daggett become the next president of the ILA. And so as the history of this individual and of the organization has kind of begun to twist and turn in public, now you're not dealing from a position of unions have historically been pretty arrogant when it comes to their negotiations, because they can be, but also the sort of entitlement and language that emanates from someone who's occupied a certain world for a long, long period of time. You pick up the patterns, you pick up the manner of speaking, you pick up the tactics that you use as negotiations, and it comes through in a public setting. And so that's why this individual, wearing his gold chain with his nearly $1 million salary and compensation package, is able to sit there and try to say, hey, I'm the voice of the everyman here. I'm the voice of these 45,000, beat down, underpaid longshoremen who really at the end of the day are just fighting an existential battle against the automation of ports and trying to make more money in the meantime, and not really thinking about the impact that their stance has on the U.S. economy, on all these other companies. So it's really the wrong man, the wrong tone in the current time and place. And I think they've really misread the room. I think there's going to be a huge amount of pressure from Wall Street, from a lot of the big companies that are on Wall Street that rely on imports, companies like Apple, companies like Facebook, companies like Walmart, Target, these companies that their supply chains are built overseas, all of the auto companies. These 45,000 guys have chosen this man as the voice of their organization. And he's telling not only Americans and politicians, I will cripple you. He's telling all of the huge companies that depend on this as well, that have their own union constituencies. And it's setting up a really nasty inside baseball type of event happening here at the political level and at the economic level.
Yeah, that's so funny to hear you say that. I said the same thing last night. He sounds like a guy who's used to negotiating with the New York City mayor in 1975 with the Gambino family standing behind him, but it ain't 1975, and now you look terrible. I said the same thing. I'm so glad I was right about that. All right, Ross, I know you don't have a crystal ball. I'm not going to ask you how long this is going to go, but everyone watching this does want to know, what impact might they expect on their own lives? Look, my wife was with her girlfriends at the big box stores yesterday, stocking up on things just in case. What's coming?
Well, when you look at the companies that have, what you would call multi-shore supply chain operations, so that would be a Walmart, for example, that does have the ability to shift cargo with some delay and cost, but and have been. A lot of these companies have been pushing back. You'll see more vessel arrivals to the West Coast, as a ratio of arrivals to the East Coast and the Gulf Coast. So even though they have distribution centers, even though they have operations that are internally linked to assuming that a Savannah or a Norfolk or a Baltimore or a Houston, a New York is their primary point of entry, they do have some optionality in their networks to be able to push some things around and bring them in different ways, get them across the country, whatever it may be. So you'll see some, intermittent shortages of certain things with the big guys. With the companies that are really at the most risk, the jobs that are really at the most risk here are the people that are really tied to one port, one location that's impacted by the strike. They will feel this a lot more strongly, because if they have one warehouse and distribution and fulfillment center in a Baltimore, for example, every vessel that sits at sea and is not able to call Baltimore and be unloaded, it is likely that a lot of their inventory that they have to have as a company is sitting on that ship, because a lot of companies still haven't learned the lessons of just in time being a weakness from the COVID supply chain crunch. They only have the cash to order when they need to order. And that means they have a sensitive arrival window of getting that in. So it's those companies that are really linked geographically to a single port that's impacted by this strike. Those are the ones that are going to really feel it the most strongly, as well as the trucking companies that operate just in that one harbor or in that one port.
Gosh, I don't know why I didn't think about it. I didn't even think about the trucking company as I was worried about the trains and everything else. Of course, it's going to freaking affect the trucking. Okay, Ross, final question. They seem like they're a million miles apart. That's what they seem like. You discussed how the workers paid $35,000 a year less than their people on the West Coast. They're worried about automation, which sounds to me like you're fighting against the ocean. You can't avoid that. But they sound a million miles apart, but that's how these things always sound in the beginning. And then you wake up one morning and there's a deal. Are we going to get a deal anytime soon, do you think?
Well, it's hard to say when exactly that will happen, but I know what indicators I guess we would look for to say, okay, we're getting close. Number one is that the marine terminal operators, the ports, and the ocean carriers have to find a way to be able to legally pass as much of this disruptiveness and additional cost on to the consumer as possible. In this case, the importers and exporters who pay the bills on every single container. So as soon as they have a strategy for that legally it can pass muster according to the Federal Maritime Commission rules, which these extra fees are very much something the FMC has been watching over the last couple of years because of the price gouging that the ports and carriers engaged in during COVID. As soon as they figure that out and they say, okay, we know we can pass the cost along, then you will see a deal happen. And the biggest reason for that is that the longshoremen are an aging population of workers that historically only recruits internally, meaning you got to be a friend or a family member to get a job as a longshoreman. It's not like you or I could walk off the street with no connections to the port and be able to get a job. The Wire season 2 showed us exactly how a lot of these things work. It's a very close-knit, incestuous circle. So that reducing population, the demographic decline, if you will, of the longshoreman population is going to drive automation. So that is almost a moot point. And the longshoremen are fighting tooth and nail against that as long as they can, because it only impacts this generation of them and really nobody that follows. So as soon as you see the ship owners and the ports figure out a way to pass along all these extra fees and costs associated with the new higher rates of labor, that's when you'll see a deal happen, because the automation issue is going to take care of itself in 5 or 10 years.
I would thank you for coming to my YouTube channel, but I know how brilliant it is, and I know you love it here. So subscribe and watch. We're going to start really ramping things up and putting some funny stuff, some interesting stuff out there, some collaborations. Either way, my YouTube channel is officially the place to be. So stick around.